My name is Brian Medway, and it's great to welcome you to this session of Old Testament Introduction. This is session number 7, and we're here to not just to get some interesting facts from a book. We're interested in connecting with God, and so that's why this method of introducing the Old Testament is not filled with my notes and all my wonderful information. I'm going to give some of that. It's not. The idea is to teach you skills that you need. If you use these skills and learn these skills, you can go to anywhere in the Old Testament and hear from God, or more importantly, know what God is saying through that part of the Bible. In this session 7, we are placed at the beginning of the third period of Old Testament history. We've broken it up into 7 sections, and we've been dealing with the creation, then we've been dealing with the period of the patriarchs, now we're dealing with the period of the Exodus and conquest. The creation period goes up to 2200. We don't know exactly how many years before that. The patriarchal period goes from 2200 to 1400 BC. That's 800 years of history. About 400 of that is Abraham and Isaac and Jacob wandering around. About 400 of that is the Joseph and the descendants of Jacob in Egypt. And now the beginning of the Exodus and conquest period begins around 1450 or so. These are just dates to give us some kind of reference point. And so this period goes from 1450, then the conquest begins at 1400, and then it goes right through till 1050 when we begin the kingdom period. These periods are arbitrarily named just simply to give you a context. It's just trying to answer the question, when. So the when now is around 1450, 1500, in that 15th century BC. And so we're looking at now understanding the context. The passages that you have read, supposedly read, a number of times, is Exodus chapter 1 through to chapter 4. Now, if you haven't read that, a number of times, I'd much rather you read that, and then we can talk about some of the things that I'm going to say based on the fact that you have actually read the passage and you've thought about it. The passage that we're going to look at in detail begins at the beginning of chapter 3 and goes down those verses there at the beginning of the call of Moses. So I'd love you to go read that, and you can stop the tape now and go read that and come back and we can talk about it. Because what we're looking for, we're looking to understand the context. We're looking for the big picture so we can understand the small picture. We're not looking for what God might say by the Holy Spirit by putting your finger on a verse. That's all fine and good. I've got no problem with that. It's just that you won't understand every word that proceeds from the mouth of God if you don't understand the context. And we're just going to look at information here, and we're going to start looking at a whole bunch of information, all the information available to us, before we start figuring out what God is actually saying. Now, this is a disciplined thing because you've read some of these stories and you know certain things about them, and you've heard people preaching on them and so forth. And so we just want to now understand the information. Just get the information. And so when you read this, just soak up the information. Don't look for anything you don't worry about things you don't know at this point. Just simply read and read it again and read it again. Become familiar. Make this part of the Bible your friend. So if you don't read it 3 or 4 times, I reckon it takes about half an hour, less than half an hour, to read through these 4 chapters. And so if you read through 3 or 4 times, that's a couple of hours. Now, that's really not a great amount of time to get familiar with something, especially when it can connect you with the heart, will, purpose and nature of God. I reckon it's wonderful. So what we're going to do now is, if you need to stop the tape, stop the tape. Otherwise, I'm going to talk to you about answering these questions, the when, where, who, why or how things happened, and so we're just going to notice that this happened. The when is around 1450. That's the beginning of the Exodus. So Moses' life begins 80 years before that. Then the period of the Exodus itself is 40 years. Then the period of the conquest goes from 1400 BC through to 1050 BC. So that's about 1400 to 1050. That's 350 years. The period of the conquest, which is 40 years or so, 50 maximum, and then the period of the Judges, which is about 300 years. So the Judges is a long period, and we've only got one book. If we want to talk about books of the Bible to do with this Exodus conquest period, just thinking about Exodus now, then the books of the Bible we're talking about are Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers and Deuteronomy. These are the 4 of the 5 books of Moses. The first book of Moses talks about the period of creation and the patriarchs. The last 4 of those 5 books, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers and Deuteronomy, all talk about the period of the Exodus and what happened at Mount Sinai and so forth. All are written by Moses. Exodus is a narrative. It starts off with Moses and finishes up with the building of the tabernacle. Leviticus talks about the giving of the law on Mount Sinai and laws about this and laws about that. Numbers is the record of the groups, the people of Israel themselves, the tribes and so forth. And then it goes on with narrative about Kadesh Barnea and then the wandering in the wilderness, and it takes us right up to the time where the children of Israel were on the eastern side of the Jordan waiting to go in 40 years after they left Egypt, and with now only 2 people, or at that time 3, who didn't leave, who left Egypt, who knew what Egypt was about. One was Moses, the second one was Joshua, and the third one was Caleb. And Moses then preaches a sermon, or a bunch of sermons, to the Israelites camped in the East Jordan area before he wanders up into the hills somewhere and dies off. So those are the 4 books that refer to this period, and the Exodus period as compared to the Judges period. So we need to understand that when we're looking at the Exodus. We're going to look at the first 4 chapters of Exodus because this is the account of how Moses came to be the leader that God called to lead the people out of Egypt and lead them. He was meant to lead them into the promised land. That was the purpose of God. And so if we say then about the when, the where is Egypt. Egypt starts off in the land of Goshen, where the people of Israel were. The other part of the where is it goes to Midian, right across the other side of the Sinai Peninsula. Then Moses gets a call from God and goes back to Egypt, and then we have the account of the wilderness, across the Red Sea, down into the Mount Sinai area, then up to Kadesh Barnea, just a few months. It was meant to be before they went into the promised land, and then this horrible experience at Kadesh Barnea, where the children of Israel could not believe God to take them into the promised land. They looked at the circumstances and so forth, and so then they wander around the wilderness. We don't know exactly where they went until the generation, 40 years was passed, until everybody in that generation died except those 3 people. Then Moses wanders off and he dies, and then Joshua and Caleb are left to take the people across the Jordan and into the promised land. So that's the where. We need to familiarise ourselves with that. And then the why, I want to talk to you about that. And the why, or how and why, we simply need to record what is going on in each of the 4 chapters. We're going to look at some words from chapter 3 especially, but we're going to be looking at the context, and so we're going to read the whole 4 chapters a number of times, and I'm just going to note for you, if you're reading these chapters then, and if you haven't got some notes down about what what you've noticed in those chapters. The idea is to notice everything that it's about, not to be too picky and choosy, just to notice those things. And if you use up a bit of paper, well, apologies to some trees somewhere, but the idea is to get your understanding of all the information available. And everything God says there is for a purpose. And so we're going to go now and have a look at the content of those chapters and think about what is going on between God, His people, His purpose, and the context in which that happens.